Welcome to episode 85 of the Search with Candour podcast, recorded on Friday the 30th October 2020. My name is Mark Williams-Cook, and today we're going to be talking all about EAT, all about expertise, authority and trust. And we're lucky enough to be joined by Lily Ray, the SEO director at Path Interactive, who is an expert in this, to talk to us about it. Before we get going, I just want to let you know this podcast is very kindly sponsored by Sitebulb. Sitebulb is a desktop-based SEO auditing tool for Windows and Mac. Speak about it every episode. I use it, our agency uses it. It's a really, really great tool. Every week I tend to go through some of the features I like about it and tell you that Sitebulb have a special offer for Search with Candour listeners, meaning if you go to sitebulb.com/SWC, that's sitebulb.com/SWC, you can get an extended 60-day trial of Sitebulb. There's no credit card or anything required. It's dead simple. There's no reason for you not to try it. So I've run through loads of different features of Sitebulb before, and one of the things I want to talk about today was a little bit more about internal link analysis. So especially on larger sites, lots of technical SEOs will know there's normally a lot of mileage you can get out of optimizing internal links. And this ranges from everything from the absolute basics of making sure that your links aren't broken to ensuring that the pages you want to rank that are competitive are linked to from important pages, have good anchor text, etc., etc. I've mentioned previously one of their really great features, which was Sitebulb can calculate the importance of each page and then work out how many links are coming from these important pages to your other pages. But one really cool thing that I like that Sitebulb does is it will tell you their understanding of the internal link location. So this will mean they will tell you if the link is present in the header, in the navigation, in the footer, in the content, in the JavaScript. And this is really important from the absolute basics of sometimes on more complicated sites where you've got a JavaScript and a non-JavaScript version and you're finding broken links, tracking down where a broken link can be on a page can be very difficult. So Sitebulb immediately flagging to you, okay, well, this link is actually in your main navigation across 5,000 pages, is really helpful to prioritize that and make that go to the top of your priority list. The other thing it can do as well, especially now it can, as we mentioned in the last episode, differentiate between JavaScript and non-JavaScript links, is actually just give you an idea of if those important pages are linked to from when they need to be. So you've spent ages writing that content, a week researching it, written this brilliant article. Is it linked from your main nav? Is it linked from the footer? Or is it in the content? So really, really helpful breakdown of your internal link structure. Only takes a few seconds. You don't need to worry about crunching the data. It does that all for you. Give it a look. Sitebulb.com/SWC. And today we are joined by Lily Ray, who is the SEO director at Path Interactive, based in New York City. Welcome, Lily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. I was just saying thank you for coming at such short notice as well, because I literally just dropped you a message and was like, hey, would you like to come and talk about this? And you were like, yeah, that's fine. So really appreciate that. I understand you've been really busy with conferences recently.
Yeah, I had so basically what happened was a lot of these SEO conferences were waiting until the fall to see if they could do the conferences in person. And of course, nobody really ended up doing it in person, so everything became online, and then it all just happened at the same time. So it was pretty busy.
How do you actually find that then, kind of doing these conferences without being able to see the people sort of in front of you and reacting? Do you find it a lot harder?
It's it's hard to know how like people are receiving what you're saying, so that's a little bit tricky. I mean, most of these conference platforms, the virtual platforms have chat rooms, so that's been helpful when people are like, "Hey, this is great," or they have a question. But it's definitely a different experience when you finish and you log out and it's like, did people like
Yeah.
it? There's no applause.
Just
There's
to a silence.
yeah, exactly. It's just me and my dog.
Cool.
Like, all right.
I think it went well.
Yeah, my dog liked
Brilliant.
it.
So, I want to talk to you today about EAT, about EAT, about expertise, authority, trust, which, without getting too meta, I think you have a lot of EAT on EAT in the industry. Is that fair to say?
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, I'm working on it. It's definitely the topic that I speak and write about the most.
So, for those that don't know you, do you want to give a kind of brief history of how you got to where you are and why you took such an interest in EAT?
Sure, yeah. So I've been doing SEO a lot longer than I've been focused on EAT. I think that's a misconception that people have about me is that I just came out
Sure.
of nowhere. That's the only thing I know about. But no, I'm an SEO director at Path Interactive. So I've been doing SEO for about just over 10 years and in the agency world for I think like 8 or 9 now. And so I lead a team of about 15 or so people at Path Interactive and dozens of different clients in different industries. And my former agency where I was at for about 6 years, I was really focused on retail and e-commerce. So that was really my strong suit at that
Okay.
point. Um, but what happened when I moved to Path was we have a lot more clients that are in what we consider the your money, your life, YMYL space. So things like healthcare clients, financial clients. And before the August 1st of 2018 update, which was now kind of labeled the Medic update, one of our clients that wrote about healthcare topics was like seeing this incredible SEO growth. And when that update rolled out, that was the hardest hit client that we had by far.
Hmm.
And it sent me down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what happened. And Google was like, look at the search quality guidelines. So I looked at the search quality guidelines and it was just so obvious that there was this big problem with EAT, um, which I think we'll talk about. But it basically
Hmm.
like the site lacked, or they didn't demonstrate medical credentials properly.
Hmm.
And the more sites that I analyzed that were negatively impacted by that update, it became more and more clear that like lack of credentials seemed to be this common problem.
Okay.
So,
So there's a specific post that kind of sparked my interest in contacting you, and we'll link to this in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can get the show notes at search.withcanada.co.uk, and that would link to a post that Lily did for Search Engine Journal, and you worked with Bill Swolsky on this post, I believe,
yep,
which was understanding how kind of Google patents might give us some hints as to how EAT is working. And I did drop Bill a line as well, and hopefully he'll be able to join us as well in a couple of weeks to talk to us a bit more about patents. But I found it a really interesting post because I know Bill does loads of stuff with patents, and to be honest, it makes some of us, certainly me, look sometimes cleverer than I am just because he's done all the legwork,
right,
kind of
totally.
going through them and bringing out, extracting what are sort of some quite interesting thoughts. What are your thoughts on this approach of analyzing patents as a way to understand what Google's possibly doing? Because we see people doing, different kinds of controlled experiments, and we see, people obviously listening to what Google tells us. How do you think patents kind of fit into this picture?
Yeah, so, I was really careful to provide a disclaimer in the article because Google hasn't explicitly confirmed that any of the patents that they have or that they've filed for directly play into the organic search algorithms. So I think it's really important to understand that they're not ranking factors. We don't necessarily know which products Google is using them for or not using them for, but there's so many parallels between the patents that they've applied for and what they seem to be wanting to do with their algorithms.
Hmm.
Like if you read the search quality guidelines, and it's, we've made it very clear, those of us that talk about the guidelines, this is not a guidebook of how to do SEO. It's not a guidebook of like, the things that Google's currently actively considering ranking factors. And in many cases, the things that are in the search quality guidelines, they've explicitly come out and said, we don't use that as a ranking factor. It's just something that you should consider when you're evaluating the quality of your content. So, but there's so many parallels in that document and in what they've filed for as patents. So when it comes to like identifying authors online and assigning a certain level of authority to authors and to brands. So it's like we see what they're trying to do with their technology through patents.
Hmm.
And we see where they're trying to make the algorithms go with the search quality guidelines. So it's kind of fair to assume the two things are probably connected.
I noticed in that article as well, you linked to a couple of tweets from Danny Sullivan, the Google search liaison. So to give everyone a little bit of background to this, I believe this was from previously Danny had said something along the lines of Google doesn't have a way to tell exactly how accurate a piece of content might be.
Hmm.
And then kind of followed up with these couple of tweets. I'll just read them very quickly. So Danny said, also, I didn't say accuracy wasn't a ranking factor, wasn't what I was asked. Asked if we could tell if content was accurate. No, we can't. But again, signals. We look for things we believe correspond to accuracy. In that regard, damn right, having accurate content is a ranking factor. It's almost as if it's almost like we look for signals that align with expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. We should give that an acronym like EAT and maybe suggest people aim for this. Oh wait, we did. And then he links to a Google blog post. A little bit salty, I think, reply
Totally,
there,
totally.
but it does, like you say, this gives us a hint of them saying, look, this is what we're aiming for. And having again followed a lot of discussions about EAT over the years, I think, as you point out again, there has been a lot of misunderstanding, and sometimes people thinking it's just like EAT is a metric, a number Google has, as opposed to these combination of things. So could you give maybe our listeners what you would describe maybe as a very brief description of what is the concept of EAT, and why is it important?
Sure, yeah. So again, it exists primarily in the Google Search Quality Guidelines, which is the document that they use to train human evaluators, which they do these experiments, like thousands of experiments every year with, I believe, 10,000 plus human search quality evaluators who basically check the quality of Google search results to make sure that it's in line with what's in the document. So the document's 160 pages that explicitly defines what Google considers to be high and low quality content. And that's where the acronym EAT first originated, I think about 5 years ago.
Mm.
So Google says all over the document, like EAT is the rubric that you should use when determining if something is good or bad quality, especially as it relates to topics like your money and your life and safety and security and things like that. So that's where it exists. And what makes it challenging for SEOs is like SEO professionals are so used to having these metrics and these tactics that are like, you can optimize a title tag by putting a keyword in a title tag, and you can probably see a ranking benefit from that. But
Mm.
it's not the same with EAT. It's not like, oh, I did this one thing. I put an author name on my blog, but I didn't see my blog increase in traffic 3 days later. It's like, you know,
I
um,
think that's a really good place actually to start, which is about authors, and this really interests me, especially Google kind of had this authorship thing going at one point, didn't they, with Google Plus and trying to
yep,
sort of tie in who did things, and then it kind of got killed off and pushed away, like many Google things sometimes do. And
exactly.
in this document, you talk about a patent called Agent Rank. Do you want to expand a little bit about that and what it is, and your thoughts on Google identifying authors and why they might want to do that?
Yeah, so I think Agent Rank was originally filed in 2007, if I remember correctly, and it was really interesting. It's basically just talking about like, if there's multiple experts on the page, can we kind of evaluate the page from the level of expertise of all these contributors and being able to identify like if an expert comments on forums in another place, like does that contribute to the expertise of that commentary or that forum? So it was like it seems like it was Google's original attempt at identifying authors, and just like kind of assigning a level of expertise to those authors. But there's been so many evolutions since that point in terms of what Google has tried to do and then deprecated in its search results.
Mm.
As you mentioned, rel author is one of them. And then at some point, Google just came out and said, we don't need you to specify who the authors are because we're too smart now. Like we're smarter than that. But they haven't made it clear what they meant by that, aside from the knowledge graph is an obvious example, or things like, establishing authors for Google News. Like they haven't told us exactly how they're using author information in the organic search results. So it's this ambiguous area, and I think that's by design. They don't really want us to know exactly what they're doing, because typical SEO behavior is to just spam everything.
No.
you know? And that's like one of the questions I always get from people is like, if I just put an expert's name on my blog, will that work? I'm like, no, it's not the point.
So this is what I found interesting. So we have these patents around identifying authors, and in your write-up, in your article, you had said in August 2018, John Mueller clarified that Google does not use individual author reputation as a ranking factor. So I guess my question to you is, um, do you think this is? I think it's easy to take that on board as Google doesn't use who authors are. Or is this a carefully worded thing, similar to what Danny said about, no, we can't measure how accurate content is, but accurate content is important. So
Yeah.
because you go on there to say, Bill's put in, it's important to distinguish here between an author's reputation, their expertise, their authoritativeness. And before we get on to, writing styles, like what do you think authors are important then at some level?
Yeah, that was a really interesting curveball, but I love what Bill offered in terms of like that's more semantics than anything. So I think the person that asked John Mueller if Google looks at basically external reputation of an author, so like if Google looks at, ratings on third-party websites about when someone said, or if somebody has a really controversial reputation, and John said no, but I don't know that that's necessarily him saying that Google doesn't have an assigned value or attribute for a given author or entity about how authoritative it thinks that that person is on a certain topic. I think those are two different things. I think that Google generates its own EAT evaluations for certain entities, but maybe that's separate from what people say about a person. Does that
Okay.
make sense? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it does. Interestingly, I think it was probably a dozen episodes or so ago, we spoke to Dawn Anderson about information retrieval. And this is closely aligning to this Google patent you mentioned around generating author vectors, which, and this is a quote from the article, enables them to be able to identify authors throughout the internet based on their writing style alone, even when their names are not explicitly mentioned on the page. So that to me is one of those kind of slightly unnerving
Yeah.
things, and it's interesting because it goes in line with other conversations we've had previously as well about GPT-3 and Google being able to detect algorithmically generated content versus human written content. And it just seems to me that if it was like a non-starter, this is identifying an author important
Mhm.
as some component of the ranking algorithm. It seems like they're putting an awful lot of effort into doing it if it's not important. Is that fair to say?
I can't imagine why it wouldn't be important. They've made it so clear. Like, if you read the search quality guidelines, every single sentence is about, even like there's a recipe that they provided on a new article that's not the search quality guidelines, but it was a recent article that Google published about how it uses human evaluators. And the example it provides is like, we tell them to look at for example, a carrot cake recipe. And when they're evaluating how good the carrot cake recipe is, obviously the first few questions are like, is it a good recipe? Is it easy to follow? But then the next questions are like, did the person that write it, is there evidence that they've written other recipes before? And how good are the recipes that they've written? How much do people like those recipes? So it's like, that's the most innocent example of baking a cake, and Google's still asking people to think about the author's expertise.
Google love giving recipe examples. I don't know why. Every example I see of Google
Totally.
for something is a recipe.
Totally.
Okay. I think we're going to get probably as far as we can do in this amount of time on authors. And I have loads of other kind of questions I want to throw at you.
Sure.
And especially a favorite of mine around EAT. And I'll just ask you outright, are backlinks, so external links, in your opinion, part of EAT?
Yeah, 100%. They've said that actually numerous times. That's actually the only ranking factor that they've confirmed as part of EAT. And it's like they
'Cause-
they just continuously, talk about that every time because they're like, well, we've already admitted this, so we might as well just keep using that as the answer to EAT.
yeah. So, I mean, I think it's sometimes I feel gets left out of the conversation of a way, Google can measure things like trust. And just kind of following on to this without straying too far off this kind of topic of EAT, I've just seen a lot of discussions recently, and I think it's fair to say it's kind of the link building that's in fashion, if you like, at the moment is very heavily digital PR focused. And this has only been, I think, increased by obviously Google's announcement about, okay, we're going to take Nofollow as a hint now. So, maybe maybe we're kind of counting those links, maybe we're not. But
Right.
I've really seen a big divide on opinion for if people are just kind of we'll say, putting 99% of their outreach effort into things like, newspapers, and they're just earning no follow links. How successful these actually are for getting rankings. Do you think this has any bearing on EAT and how Google's looking at the types of links we're getting now?
I think as it relates to EAT, it's less about follow and no follow, especially given that it's just a hint
Mm-hmm.
now. I think it's more about authoritativeness of that industry, or like relevance to that industry. So Bill actually provided a really amazing example when we were talking about it, because Bill's an attorney, and he was an attorney before becoming an SEO. But he found an example where this lawyer who was highly specialized in one area started a legal blog, and it was so beneficial, and he just came out of nowhere, and the website didn't exist before that point, but he started providing these super valuable resources or articles for lawyers, and as a result the lawyers were all linking to him because they found it super valuable. And then he came out of nowhere and started ranking number one for everything because he was so authoritative in his field. And then like eventually his company got acquired. So I think that's a really interesting example. And I might have been paraphrasing a little bit what the story was, but the takeaway is that like if you are highly authoritative in one area, you will probably earn authoritative links from that area. So if you write really great SEO content, you're going to get authoritative links from the SEO articles. And me personally, like when I write content, I don't care about follow or no follow at all.
Mm-hmm.
If I am checking back on the links, I'm just hoping that they're coming from reputable SEO resources. And that builds authoritativeness in whatever category that you're in. So,
Notice there we picked the words earn and not build links.
oh yeah. Yeah. I think links
There's
should
another,
come because the content that you're writing is relevant to the audience that you care about. That's
yeah.
my fundamental link building policy.
So the other thing that really interests me in this article, again, has gone in line with other things we've seen Google doing around Google indexing podcasts, understanding the content in there. They just recently announced as well about jumping to the right point in YouTube videos that's relevant to the query. And you mentioned here about speaker identification, which is a patent Google was granted that allows them to identify a speaker by using speech recognition.
Right. Right.
Um, so how do you see that kind of fitting in terms of, people do podcasts like this, is this podcast going to kind of help you, do you think, in the bigger picture?
I think it helps both of
Or
us.
if it was a more authoritative podcast, we'll say it was a better one.
No, I think it's clear. Like if you connect all the dots, they're indexing podcasts. They're, now able to identify who people are just by their voice. Google Home is a thing that they're trying to push people to have in their homes. Like they're just trying to further extend their abilities to understand people and who they are and what they talk about. And I think that it's all connected for sure. So it's just another, the fact that they own YouTube and they have all this video and audio content. It's just another place for them to go to understand not only who people are, but what they talk about, how they talk, accents, inflections in their voice, all kinds of data points that they could use. So I think it's all connected.
So going out as a random stretch here, we've talked about links being used to as a component to EAT. So you appearing, for instance, on this podcast, if Google knows who you are and decides that you have expertise in SEO and EAT, that's almost a similar like a similar signal to like a link almost, that you're interacting with this other entity that's writing about that? Would you think that's that? I'm just trying to get an idea for our listeners on, okay, Google can identify people by voice and authors by voice. What is the use of that? Is it to
Hmm.
kind of almost track their fingerprints online and say, well, they've touched this, therefore that's now more relevant to this kind of topic?
Yeah, so like think about, I don't know if you've used SparkToro at all. Rand Fishkin's
Yes, I
good
have.
tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so think about when you put an entity or an author into SparkToro and it tells you these are all the affiliated podcasts, these are all the affiliated YouTube channels, these are the influencers in that category. Like there's no way Google doesn't have similar data for a given expert or topic. So, if you see that you're a nutritionist and the Food Network YouTube channel has interviewed you, yeah, that's the same effect as a backlink, in my opinion. That's like making connections because the Food Network is an expert brand and they only feature trustworthy people. I'm maybe not. I'm just making this up as an example. I don't actually use the Food Network very often, but you know what I mean. Like it's what Google
Yeah.
says in its search quality guidelines. They say when you're evaluating if a chef is an expert, you should look at the other health and nutrition and food magazines that they've been featured on. So I think they're trying to replicate that process through all the different data points and places on the internet that they can look to.
I know we're kind of stretching, really stretching here what we found in patents, but I mean, this is actually key to a lot of the training we give on SEO, which is about not just looking at tactics that we know and have been confirmed are ranking factors, but as you've alluded to, really trying to understand what Google's long-term strategy is and trying to align what you're doing with that. Because we can chase our tails all day about, is this definitely this or is it not? And I don't think it's a smart long-term move to rule out doing something just because you can't 100% confirm at the moment it's going to be a thing. Because obviously, if you do things that, even Google doesn't measure right now, but are in that long-term kind of goal, there's no reason why it can't retroactively look back at those things as they update their algorithm and get better as well.
Totally. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, just to add to that, like there's almost no EAT focused recommendation that's counter to a good branding strategy.
yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
well,
exactly. So,
you,
and
yeah,
that links actually in. So in this in this write up, there's one line that particularly interests me, which says, so you go on to talk about how Google determines if a person or a brand is a real expert or an authority in their field, and you said that some of these implications suggest that faking good EAT is going to be quite difficult. And that's again, you mentioned about Google being specific about ranking factors, because you're exactly right. As soon as Google is specific about something, people are going to try and optimize that, like the big, pre-Penguin, the easiest example was obviously links. And we
right.
had, huge, quite public, just link selling platforms that were doing, millions of dollars, millions of pounds of business just trading links. And it was working really well. And obviously it was basically breaking Google to a point. Um, so how do you think EAT and this kind of focus is going to change what SEOs do day to day? If it's having this less direct impact on our work essentially.
Yeah, it's a great question because it for a lot of people it's not going to be good news. For for a lot of the people that you mentioned, like that focused on short-term hacks and gimmicks, and even to this day I get people responding to my work like, "Oh, thanks for pointing out all those things that you should do because I'm just going to go spam them and like I'm going to win." It's like that's just not going to work. Maybe it'll work temporarily, but real SEO nowadays, especially for sites that are being impacted by these EAT concerns, it's really, really hard work. It's also not necessarily something where you can see the immediate results of your efforts in terms of traffic and rankings and everything. It might
Mm.
take a year. It might take 2 years, and it's especially if you've already like run into trouble. Like I have some clients where they used to provide really dangerous advice on certain topics, and now they have to go back in there and update all the advice so it's not dangerous anymore. And it can take Google a really long time to trust your content. So it just makes the work harder. It makes it more, it requires creativity, and it also just requires authenticity, which a lot of people don't have time or patience for. So I think that it's going to change the SEO strategy for a lot of people quite a bit.
That's interesting. So when we are talking about this, Google determining if a person brand is a real expert, if they're an authority, um, we talked about, or sorry, you talked about in the article, website representation vectors patent, which this patent tells us that Google is capable of classifying websites into various categories of expertise, such as expert, apprentice, and layperson, and rank pages based on the authoritativeness of the content found on those pages. And they give a few examples of how Google might do this, such as analyzing text or images on the site, looking at other website content like links, combination of the above. If we can get more specific, something like images, what might Google be looking for in images in terms of working out if someone is authoritative or a real expert in their field?
Hmm. Well, it's hard to say exactly, but I think that looking at their Vision AI tool is a nice place to start, because there's some
Yeah.
surprising attributes on there. So, like, let's say you put in, 50 different pictures of lawyers, and it always tells you, like, this person has this type of look on their face, or this type of outfit on, or they're in this type of environment where it's like very corporate and buttoned up. Like, this is an extreme example, but maybe a picture of some guy in his pajamas, like, who's pretending to be a lawyer, they'll be able to tell from the image,
Or an
like,
SEO.
yeah, a fake expert, like, where's the picture of that guy in the suit in the courtroom? Like, just the little things
Mhm.
like that, where I think that using that tool is very informative, because it starts to tell you like 50 different attributes about the picture and about the person that you didn't even consider as something that they're looking at.
It's certainly a discussion we've had with other people around things like e-commerce sites and using things like stock photography, even on the very basic level of, we know some people, their purchase behavior is they start on Google Images. So if they're looking for, I don't know, like a suit or something, they might do a search and then go straight to Google Images.
Right.
And the people who were using stock imagery supplied by the supplier were at a disadvantage, because Google's not going to show the same photo again and again and again. So it's going to
Yep.
pick, whatever site it decides. Whereas if they've done their own high quality photography, they're way more likely to appear in that image search. And that did start me down this kind of line of, oh, I wonder, again, how this plays into what Google's expecting in terms of images and reuse. And I
Yeah.
just found these quite interesting examples when Google did say something like images, because again, I know I've kind of backed you into a very specific corner here. And like you said, there's lots of different products that Google have. So it may not even be, like you say, relevant to kind of universal search results. It might just be a thing for Google Images. But there's a few other things I did want to pick your brains about in terms of this, in terms of especially ads as well. So we had in August the virtual webmaster unconference that we covered in episode 80. And one thing I found really interesting there was in Google's webmaster guidelines, it talks about not having ads that are, I can't remember the exact words, basically obstructive of your main content, like popping up and kind of tricking you into clicking on stuff.
Right.
And one of the myths that was busted by the Google team during Unconference was that there's no kind of algorithm or no ranking difference for a site as to whether they have ads or not. So we sort of concluded it was more about how you implemented the ads. So it's fine if you have ads,
Hmm.
but obviously if you're popping them up everywhere, then that might kind of withdraw from that. But then again, when I go back and read this in your article about this patent around obtaining authoritative search results, so it describes the process Google uses to rank authoritative sites for queries that require authoritative results, and how Google can distinguish authoritative sites, I'm going to get tired saying authoritative in a second, from sites that are low quality because they contain shallow content or too many ads.
Hmm.
And something else that we'll get onto there about this authoritative sites and smaller kind of pools to pick from is, do you think, and again, I'm asking you just to wildly speculate here with me for fun, so that's the caveat, that, on sites that are maybe going to this your money, your life territory, is having ads maybe a bad thing? Because you're monetizing what's on the page? Because it seems logically to me, maybe if you're trying to sell people off that page, that's not a good thing.
Yeah,
So this is open to you to wildly speculate now. We won't hold you to it.
yeah, no. I think it's a great question. So there's a fine line for sure. And Google understands, they've made it very clear. We understand that for many sites, that's how you make money. I mean, the biggest, most authoritative sites on the internet make money through ads. So the New York Times
Mhm.
makes money through ads. That's fine. And that's a business model that is perfectly fine. I think the real question is, are you deceiving people with your ads or are you frustrating people with your ads? And even some of the big players like the New York Times, like you could probably ask a lot of people that use that site and they would say, yeah, the ads are frustrating because that's how they make money. And they have to be somewhat aggressive with their ads to pay the bills.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line. So when you're on a piece of content that is offering medical advice, and I'm not going to name names here, but when you have quote unquote related articles at the end of the content that say, you won't believe this horrible skin condition that this person got with like a really grotesque photo, and that's an ad, and that's a page that's supposed to be providing like skincare advice. I think that's a problem. And Google's made it clear they don't like those types of ads. And Healthline is another example. They make money off ads, but they have ads that are like nicely placed on the page that don't get in your way, and they're easy to use. They're high quality ads, and they have a whole page about the ad disclaimers and how they choose their ads, and when they do sponsored content, they make it very clear. So there's a time and place for it. There's a way to do it properly. And the days of providing really low quality content and hoping people click on ads or tricking people into clicking on ads,
Hmm.
I think that those days are pretty much over for good if you want SEO performance.
So one thing we did cover in episode 80 as well, and I haven't seen it personally, was Glenn Gabe pointed out when he went back from a site to the SERPs, he was offered a little question essentially on how much did the ads bother you on this site. So Google was literally saying like, did the ads basically negatively affect your experience? And I
Hmm.
thought that was really interesting because we know they're rendering the pages and they're trying to recreate what the user's seeing, and
Right.
it's quite a difficult subjective job to work out if the ads are bothersome. And of course there's if you really wanted to, you could hide your ads from Google by roboting them out and stuff. And it just again it clicked to me that this does for me feels like something Google's still working hard on. if
Yeah.
they're if they're apart from quality raters, they're getting just kind of random people to answer questions like how bad were the ads on this site, and trying to
Hmm.
build that model of what's good, what's not.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to be a really big area of focus for them. I think that the update that we're seeing with Core Web Vitals is yet another example of Google trying to crack down
Mm.
on ads that provide a poor experience, or more importantly, deceptive like ads or experiences. So, I provided the example the other day where it's like, you go to a site and like these converter websites where you're converting an MP3 to a MP4 or something, and then you click download and suddenly you have malware on your computer. Like that's
Yeah, they're hard to use. That takes a lot of internet experience to use one of those
totally,
sites.
totally. So it's stuff like that that I think they're really paying attention to. But I mean, what you said about showing Google one thing and showing the user another as it relates to your ads, those are the types of strategies where it's like you're just going to put so much effort into something that's going to get you in trouble, or they're going to catch on to it eventually. I just don't think it's a good approach.
So time is flying on. So let's kind of talk about your money, your life,
Sure.
YMYL. Um, so very quickly, do you want to give an intro to people that might not have heard of that before, and how Google decides which sites are your money, your life, and can we tell if they are?
Yeah, so that also comes from the search quality guidelines. It almost goes hand in hand with EAT every time. So basically, it just defines your money, your life, and I've said this so many times in 2 years, I should know it by heart. Pages or topics that affect people's well-being, safety, happiness, or things like political awareness, basically. So like news and political content. That's all they say. So they don't say, here's the 50 categories that we consider your money or life. They do provide some examples where it's like news and finance and legal and health, but there's a lot of gray area. So there's a lot of people that
No
ask me,
recipes.
I don't think recipes is included on there, but they do go on to say in many cases you can have good EAT for recipe content. So I have a graph that my graphic designer Haley, who's amazing, she made me this beautiful image of my EAT meter and how much EAT matters, because I think the more YMYL you are, the more EAT matters. So they actually say in their documentation EAT matters most when a crisis is developing. So like coronavirus 2020.
I can't think of one.
Yeah. Or like elections or things like that. But I think there's a spectrum. So if you write about like fixing guitars and it's your personal blog, like you could just be a hobbyist, that's fine. But if you're writing about how to cure cancer, you need the highest possible levels of EAT.
Hmm.
So that's the YMYL spectrum.
So in the post as well, you talk about pains that look at maybe Google looking at a reduced pool of sites when it's dealing with these sensitive queries,
Hmm.
or at least sites that have quote unquote high EAT. And I think it's fair to surmise from what we talked about so far, EAT isn't a thing you earn overnight just by, updating some tags on your page.
Right.
So the $1 million question is, if you are a new company in this space, we'll just say, in a your money, your life space, that's maybe, giving medication advice or anything like that, how long can you expect it to take to get into that kind of pool of sites Google might consider trusting?
Yeah, I think I love this question because a lot of people, especially in the health area, they
Don't
feel
don't lie. No SEO likes the question, how long is it going to take?
no, I mean,
Surely.
it's unfortunate to have to answer that question when clients have limited budgets and no patience, of course. But I don't think it's impossible to break into certain YMYL areas as an expert. It's really about how you approach it. So like, and this is what I love about it is that I think it's become the job of an SEO team. Like we have clients, for example, where there's a person at the company that goes out there and does speaks at conferences and they're well known in the industry. Maybe they've been published on Google Scholar, or like they're truly experts. And for most brands, there should be at least one expert. Like, if you're a plumbing company, there's an expert in plumbing, hopefully, at the company who's certified and has the right credentials to be fixing the plumbing in your house. But in many cases, they're not communicating on the website who that expert is. So I think it's the job of an SEO team to talk to those brands and say, can we go interview the plumber about their background and where they went to school and what credentials they have? And like, can we make that stuff all clear on the website? And more often than not, the brand's like, oh yeah, we never thought to do that before. So we've been doing this with a lot of our clients who do have like experts on taxes or experts on finance or whatever. And we're just tying it all together with like structured data and the places they've been listed online and building out more robust author biographies. So I think it's kind of an exciting time in SEO. And to your question about how quickly it can happen, if you're well credentialed and hopefully like people link to you because they trust your content, or maybe you've already been listed somewhere online, and it's just a matter of tying those things together. I think it can happen relatively quickly. Maybe in a few months with the right links and visibility.
So I think I was going to ask you as a kind of closing question around, for those managing SEO internally, what they should be thinking about strategically in terms of EAT. But you've literally just answered that perfectly, I think, which is around, the SEO team thinking more outside of just we need to make content about keywords and we need to get links, but about how can we get hold of the people that are the actual experts? How can we make that visible on the site? Get those people out talking to other people, use the technical knowledge we've got to link it all up and make it visible. I think that's a fair summary, and you've actually just done that perfectly without even asking.
There you go. Thank you.
So I think we're already at 40 minutes here. So Lily, thank you so much for taking the time on the spot just to come. And that's what an expert you are, that you needed like an hour's notice that we can just come and talk about this and it will all be fine. Is there anywhere, have you done any talks recently we can link to about EAT if people want to learn more? You can put something in the blog post.
Yes, I'm trying to think which ones are public. I did the Search Engine Journal one earlier this year that's public, and a few ones recently. So PubCon, I spoke about EAT. The On-Crawl Summit, We Love SEO, I just spoke about EAT. A couple ones in Spanish, I spoke about EAT as well. But
Wow.
actually, I have a new page on my own personal website, which is lilyray.nyc/EAT.
If you want to find even more about EAT, go and check that out. Again,
Yeah.
Lily, thank you so much. And we're going to be back in 1 week's time, which will be Monday, the 9th of November. So if you do enjoy the podcast, do come back, subscribe, share it with a friend, link to it, follow, we don't mind. And have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.